So the world is changing, ladies and gentlemen. The systems are being challenged. And you have a great opportunity to create something new. And here's more of another way of looking at it. Sort of this notion of cognitive agents. So this notion of how we use blockchain, how I create a reputation system, how do I interact, and how do I interact such that people are absolutely involved. The people, we call it empathetic engineering, human engineering. It's funny, human factors, right? Think about the person who's involved. What about my proof of survival? We talked about this a little bit earlier, but this notion about digital identity, that I could actually have a global identity, that I choose to share that identity when I share it. That you have now something like an Airbnb for refugees, when you think about their stories. And by the way, we've had refugee hackathons, and the family, and how, what are they looking for? What's happening as you're crossing the desert, or you're crossing the ocean? What is happening? What does my identity look like? Could I have a proof of survival? Clean water and medicine, what are the basics? These are the basics. And that's one side of the house, but let me suggest that I could have that anyway, today. Today. Stuff that we're thinking about now. And the other notion is, what about the human trafficking problem? And those are big numbers, ladies and gentlemen. How do we now solve for those numbers? And if that isn't a shock for you, it should be. Because it's not just happening outside the States, it's happening here. So we need to look at how do we now have a platform that's actually tracking, helping you have that identity, rather than a tattoo that says you work in a brothel 2 streets down, right? And you were forced to. Something to absolutely challenge you by. This is a harder problem. But you have to think about the use of drones in a way that we can care. What could we bring if you were in an emergency situation? It's a much difficult problem, but an interesting opportunity for us, that we send care packages in. Medicine is a very big challenge, because I've talked to somebody about that. You have to look at how that gets carried in, but think about it. The drones for providing material, for absolutely tracking people, to absolutely get them rescued and mapped. And get them on board and help them. And this is just an example for getting the food and water and, by the way, education. Let me suggest to you that solving a billion people problem is going to take the following ingredients. Gender equality is one, and the reason why we mention that is, how many of you are familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goals? There are 17 of them. Thank you very much. Homework is to be familiar with them. Number 1 is end poverty. Number 5 is gender equality. In a world of 7.3 billion people, 51% of the population happen to be women. And so we need to think about how do you actually, when you're engineering, how are you mapping your solution to those SDG goals? It's something to think about. How do we create, this is the story, simplification of travel. I share with you what I choose to share with you. What does a digital ID look like? We have examples. Estonia is an example. Please pay attention to your privacy. Here's what happened in the UN event on May 20th. Somebody asked the question, what would happen if a dictator got a hold of Facebook? Think about that. What would happen if you were in World War II in Nazi Germany, if Joseph Goebbels got a hold of Facebook? Think about that. So it's a little dicey here, right? What about our environment? We care about that. Water. There's this whole notion of how we simplify the system in taxes. By the way, I will say to you, living abroad is interesting for me, because the United States is the only government next to a trio that double taxes its citizens. Access to health care is absolutely important, and that's just the way it is for people who are in dire need, but for everybody. And then, of course, technology access and education, and how we disrupt education. On the technology, I had a technical meetup at the school. We have a there's a school in Berlin. We didn't know much about the backgrounds of the people. Some of them live in Tempelhof Airport in the dorms. But what they do is they get up and they learn German. That's their day. They learn German because they have to integrate, number 1. Number 2 is they learn to code. So when we had the technical meetup, they were really technical. They were pushing the boundaries on the technical discussion. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, Priscilla Chan, visited the same school 3 weeks later. And what we're doing is hiring them at Cisco as fully paid interns. And on the other hand, for people who are unemployed, looking at how we skill up the unemployed together. What do the skills look like? Now, here's the thing. I hope I have challenged you to solve for these billion people problems. I hope that you believe it's a moonshot and that together we can do that. And I mean that together because it's in beta and we need you. Thank you.